How is this 3D printer this cheap and this good? That's the question I was asking myself throughout this video. But even with this question in mind, there is a little bit of controversy with it, so let's get started. The Elegoo Centauri Carbon came out in 2025, and looking at the specs, it seems like a typical Core XY machine. 256 cubed millimeter build volume, nozzle temperature going up to 320 C, bed goes up to 110 C, speeds up to 500 millimeters per second. It has Wi-Fi, it has camera, LED lights, more on that later, filament runout sensor, carbon filter, and a bunch of other nice features. And all of this for just under $300 US. Speaking of, I bought this printer with my own money, and Elegoo did not pay for this review. I do have an affiliate link in the description if you would like to check it out. With the basic specs of the machine covered, let's look at some of the lore behind the Centauri Carbon. Initially, when it was first released, Elegoo stated multiple times that Centauri Carbon was not based on Klipper, and most reviewers and content creators took this at face value. However, over the months since the initial release, the community did further digging, and it turned out that CC firmware was indeed based on Klipper, even though it was heavily modified. So that's a little bit iffy when a company is not being fully truthful about the software, especially when it is based on open source software. On a side note, the community also developed a patched version of the software called OpenCentauri, and I'll go through that in a bit. The second part of the controversy is that AMS was promised to be delivered in Q3 of 2025 for this printer. And there was also a significant amount of marketing around AMS when CC was originally released. However, it is February 2026, and we still don't have it. Although, to be fair to Elegoo, they have been releasing frequent updates about AMS development for the Centauri Carbon, and even going as far as offering some freebies as sort of compensation for the delay. Even though the AMS situation kind of sucks, I'm actually impressed that they're sticking with delivering AMS in 2026. I honestly was half expecting them to sweep it under the rug and get people to buy Centauri Carbon 2, which comes with AMS from day one. Anyway, let's look at the unboxing experience. I ordered the Centauri Carbon on Monday and it arrived on Wednesday. Kudos to Yodel in the UK for quick delivery. It came with a chunky box and a fair amount of packaging material. It did not arrive damaged. To set it up, I had to screw 3 bolts holding down the bed, remove the packaging, and plug in the mains cord. Looking at the goodies that came with the printer, I definitely noticed that they were on the light side, probably a sign of the price of this 3D printer, but it didn't really bother me that much. Then I ran through the initial calibration, which took about 30 minutes. It ran through the usual health checks, like getting bed and nozzle temperatures, input shaping, bed leveling, and other good stuff that is standard for modern Core XY 3D printers these days. During the calibration, my initial impressions were that this 3D printer is loud. Both the motors and the fans definitely let you know whenever they're working. Here's a little snippet of how it sounded. I was almost worried that this Centauri Carbon would take off and fly to a nice holiday with the amount of air it was pushing through. With initial calibrations out of the way, I loaded up some Creality Hyper PLA, link in the description, and got to printing. I first printed this Benchy, which was already on local storage. It came out nicely, but I did notice some minor artifacts on it. Even though it wasn't perfect, it was workable, and I proceeded with some prints as I was really eager to see what this cheap and cheerful printer could do. I printed this Eiffel Tower and this multi-wall vase. They took 2 and 4 hours respectively. The quality is decent, although I noticed that sometimes it struggles with overhangs, which is ironic because sometimes it sounds like a jet engine taking off. Then I wanted to print my own models, using Elegoo Slicer, and check out their user interface. I downloaded Elegoo Slicer, which is based on Orca Slicer, from the USB drive, updated it with the most recent version, and sliced it with some parts. Now, the interface to access Centauri Carbon is a bit basic. I was kind of expecting it to be like Fluid. I think it is fine for newbies because they won't find it overwhelming, but if you're an experienced 3D printing enthusiast, I think you would be disappointed. Looking at the UI, it is missing some functionality, like being able to view bed leveling results, and sending direct console commands. Again, I think it is fine considering the price point. Going back to PLA printing, I printed a few other bits and pieces, like this torture toaster It came out nice, but a couple of tolerance tests failed. Then, happy with my PLA printing, I went to print with Creality's Hyper PETG. I mostly use this material with my models. I'll link it in the description. PETG models came out nice. I didn't have to adjust the Z offset, even though I find that PETG usually requires a little bit more space between the nozzle and the bed. After PETG, I decided to try a TPU. Elegoo does advertise that this printer works with flexible filaments, so I wanted to give it a go, and I was not disappointed. I printed this benchy using 98 TPU. It came out pretty good. Then I printed a few other models, like this stress ball and this test model. There are some quality issues, but I think it's workable. Unlike the Creality K2, which I reviewed last month, Centauri Carbon does work with flexibles. Finally, I did some test prints with ABS to take advantage of the high temperatures that the Centauri Carbon offers. Some of the highlights include this benchy, a couple of these planter trays, and a few other bits and pieces. I haven't had any issues with ABS. The only concern I have is similar to the Creality K2, is that after ABS printing, the room smells like ABS fumes, which is strange because given that it advertises that it has a filter at the back, I doubt that it works really well. I did try printing with different fans on and off, but it didn't really make much of a difference. So if you're planning on printing with ABS and similar filaments, I think you'd need to do it in a well-ventilated room or have a filtration system going. During my printing, the chamber fans would be too loud and oftentimes without any need. This is because the temperature inside the chamber would be around 20 C, so there isn't really much of a purpose for them to be always on during printing. This is when I discovered OpenCentauri, which is a community patch that made my Centauri Carbon quieter. It also allowed me to control the lighting and the fans remotely during printing, which the stock firmware disallows. Now, I am on the fence about this kind of community-initiated software. On one hand, I think it is great that some folks are so passionate about the 3D printers that they dedicated their own time to build tools that improve the quality of life features of the Centauri Carbon. Not only that, but they also reverse engineered the original firmware, figured out how to incorporate ongoing Elegoo patches, and support the community in installing OpenCentauri. I really respect the people behind this project. On the other hand, just to be the devil's advocate, when the community fixes the issues that are supposed to be addressed by Elegoo and other 3D printing companies, what signal does this send to them? Are we saying, oh, it is okay to release half-baked software because the open source community will fix these? I'd love to hear your thoughts on which side you might be on this topic. Another hot topic about the Centauri Carbon is the lighting inside the chamber. Originally, when it came out, it had a tiny LED light near the camera, and the build plate was barely visible if there was no other light in the room. However, I'm happy to report that the model that I have, the lighting is very good. They actually have two LED strips, one on the front and one on the right side, and the build plate is clearly visible. I can't really ask much more than that, given the price point of this 3D printer. And this is one of the reasons why I like doing reviews on printers that came out a little while ago. It gives me the opportunity to check if the manufacturer improved their 3D printer since the original release, or they just ignored the feedback of the customers. It says a lot about a company when they decide to do the latter or the former. On the topic of being inside the chamber, there is no active chamber heating with the Centauri Carbon. It does monitor the temperature inside, but it is not possible to set a target temperature and let the printer heat up the build space. Again, for this price point, I don't think it is a big deal. In any case, you can always get one of the small heaters or heat up the bed to 110 C, leave it for a little while, and then see the temperatures go up. To summarize, I think the Centauri Carbon is a good printer for the price point it is at. So what I liked about it? The first one is that it worked fine with all 4 filament types that I tested with, including TPU. Second one is that it is still a fast 3D printer. And the third one is that the amount of features you get for the price point means it is a good value Core XY machine. What I didn't like about it is the noise. So using stock firmware, the printer is unnecessarily loud. Second one is that the user interface is a bit basic. It does not even come close to fluid UI. And depending on the model you might get, you might end up with poor LED lighting. Overall, I had a fun time printing and playing around with the Centauri Carbon. It might not be the best or the most feature-packed printer, but I think it is a good value Core XY machine, especially for a total beginner without breaking the bank. I'm curious to hear your experience with the Elegoo Centauri Carbon. Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.